And you go. You're good.
Oh, you did the 3, 2, 1.
That was it.
Good morning, everybody. Good morning to people on the screen. Good morning to attendees in the room. This is the meeting of the Legislative Task Force to revitalize the Vermont dairy industry on November 2nd in room 10 of the State House. We will start with introductions of task force members on the screen and then into the room, and then move right into the testimony. So we'll start with Senator Starr.
Yes, good morning, everybody. I'm Bobby Starr. I chair the Senate Ag Committee during the regular session and am co-chair of this meeting here on the dairy revitalization program. Glad to be here.
John Roberts.
So I'm John Roberts, a member of the committee, former dairy farmer, now executive director for the farmer advocacy group, the Champlain Valley Farmer Coalition. Thank you.
I apologize to the legislative members. I was going around the screen. Mr. Marcotte.
Not a problem, Dan. Thank you. Good morning. I'm Mike Marcotte. I'm state representative from Coventry, and I'm chair of the House Committee on Commerce and Economic Development.
Mr. O'Brien.
Good morning, everybody. I'm John O'Brien. I'm state rep from Royalton in my hometown of Tunbridge, and I serve on the House Committee on Agriculture and Forestry.
And our last member on the screen is Heather Darby. Ms. Darby.
Morning, everyone. I'm Heather Darby, and I work with the University of Vermont Extension, and I'm an agronomist and soil specialist.
Back into room 10, Senator Brock.
Hi, I'm Senator Randy Brock. I represent Franklin County and Alberg and Grand Isle County. I'm a member of the Senate Finance Committee, and I'm also the Senate Minority Leader.
Ms. Folsom, welcome.
Thank you. Sorry I'm late. Jackie Folsom, retired dairy farmer from Cabot, Vermont, and currently the legislative director for the Vermont Farm Bureau.
And I'm Dan Smith. I'm co-chair with Senator Starr and an attorney practicing with a specialty in milk market regulation in Montpelier. So just a quick word about the agenda before we get started. The idea for today's meeting is to begin to look to the future. We've spent a number of meetings developing a picture of the industry as it has been operating and how it has changed. And with this meeting, the task force starts to look to the future to begin to think about what we will do based on what we've heard. So the agenda, as you will see, is divided into two topics. One is how the market will operate and what the opportunities are, with also concentration on identifying possible trends in consumer choice. And the second part of looking to the future is what does the regulatory environment look like for farmers going forward. And we've tried to bring in witnesses with specialization in those two fields, as well as with this meeting, capture all of the witnesses that task force members have requested over time, and there was a good convergence of those two. So that's the plan for the agenda coming up, and at the end we'll do a little bit of planning with the task force before we adjourn. Bobby, do you have anything to add? Otherwise, we'll get started with our first witness.
No, I think you covered it well, Dan, and we should get started so that, everybody has an opportunity to be heard.
We have our witnesses at the table from New England Dairy, and we look forward to your testimony. And again, thank you very much for attending in person. We really appreciate it.
Okay, thank you. I'm Michael DeAngelis, the Vice President of Integrated Marketing Communications for New England Dairy. I've been in the marketing comms area for more than 25 years. And much of my career has been focused on commodities across the board. USDA checkoff programs has been the focus of my career for a long time. And I've been with New England Dairy for just about 4.5 years in this position. And I'm grateful for the invitation today.
Good morning to the task force members. My name is Rainey Tebow. I am a member of our integrated marketing communications team under Michael. I'm a farmer relations specialist. Boots on the ground with our farmers, talking to them, working with them, understanding the issues, concerns they might have, and helping to connect our farmers to our different audiences here in Vermont and across New England.
First, we'd like to thank Senator Starr and Chairman Smith and the members of the task force for the invitation today to speak with you about the dairy consumer in Vermont and the trends that are happening around us. We recognize there's a significant task facing this committee, and we certainly share in your desire to revitalize the dairy industry here in Vermont. And we look forward to addressing some of your questions that were provided to us ahead of time through our various slides. Before I get too far into this, I do want to clarify that New England Dairy is an extension of the U.S. Department of Agriculture. And as such, we're not able to comment on any policy or policy-related questions or any proposals that may come before this committee, but we do want to share our information that we have based on our consumer research over the years. I want to spend a little bit of time just level setting you on a little bit of New England Dairy, and I'll do this in short order. We are the leading dairy promotion organization in New England. We cover 5 of the New England states, Vermont included, minus Maine. Maine has its own promotion organization that we work very closely with. We are important for the Vermont dairy because we have access to 13.5 million consumers just in our 5 states. If you add Maine, that's 15 million consumers that are consuming dairy products, much of which comes from Vermont. We have 19 passionate dairy advocates on staff with skills ranging from marketing communications, farmer relations, and nutrition. I myself am a registered dietitian as well. And we are farmer funded, and we are also farmer led. We have a 12-member board of farmers that directs our program, 8 of whom reside in Vermont as well. So very much focused in that area. Next slide. So our organization really works on the standard of our vision is really to be a catalyst for the New England dairy community and to be the voice of dairy farmers. We are where your milk goes to the end consumer. I know there was some conversation about where milk goes to processing plants, mainly here in Vermont, in one of your earlier meetings. But in terms of the consumer and the product, much of it goes outside of Vermont. And our people on our team are really our programs. The expertise that we bring over the years is really what fuels our work as an organization. So enough about us and more about dairy demand and what's going on around us. So if we look back, and this data is from 2020, so keep that in mind. But at retail, dairy is the largest edible aisle of all the different areas within the retail space. And what this really tells us is that it leads the way. Dairy leads the way. And there's also research that when dairy is included in a grocery shopping cart, it increases the value of the shopping cart because more things get added into that shopping cart. So dairy really is a driver in the retail space, and it definitely led the way. It is, it is really what people turn to and such an integral part of their shopping experience. Next slide. Nearly all households purchase dairy. You look across all of these categories, you'll see that bottom number is household penetration. And cheese at 97%, milk, fluid milk at 94%, and so on down the line. So dairy is what people really turn to. In 2020, there really was a dramatic shift across all of the categories. This obviously fueled by the health concerns, fueled by people being at home more from work and school, eating more meals together. And still, we see that the growth in cheese and milk in that period and the penetration into households was clearly unique in that people had a desire and a need that they saw for dairy in their lives across the board. Next slide. So while 2020 was unique, if we can say that. There is a strong 20-year picture as well around dairy consumption. And these charts show the 20-year trajectory of purchases over the long-term growth. So first of all, per capita dairy consumption in the United States is at the highest it's been since 1960 at 655 pounds per person. That is per capita. These graphs show all channel sales for dairy products over the past 20 years. And notice that cheese and butter have had strong performance. Yogurt's flattened a little bit over recent years, and the fluid milk, alas, we all know this story, has shown a steady decline for various reasons, which we'll talk more about. But definitely, this is fueled in many ways by the idea of innovations that have happened. Plus, people love cheese, which helps a lot. But also innovation in yogurt. The yogurt spike really happened around the Greek yogurt movement, where that became new, and now you start to see it flatten out. Some of that flattening may be due to saturation in New England because we're such high yogurt consumers, but overall through the country, there may be a saturation rate that's reaching in yogurt. Next slide, please. So let's talk a little bit about New England as a market. As I mentioned, you have a large number of consumers outside of Vermont, 13.5 million. However, the production in New England can't match the per capita consumption. So production and consumption are off kilter, where we actually have to bring milk into the market from Eastern New York. Because of this demand in major urban and suburban areas outside of Vermont, there is more than 85% of milk leaves the state for the end consumer. So the people consuming your products produced here in Vermont are outside. So it's really looking at where are the trends in the big urban centers and the suburban centers. What are those consumers thinking about dairy? That's going to drive where the opportunities are going forward in terms of innovation or product position. This is recent retail data as of October 3rd. And it is year to date. So I'm going to say that because it's comparing 2021 to 2020. We know 2020 was unusual. But as you can see, milk volume year to date, total is down, but flavored is up. So when you start to segment out the categories within fluid, again, that speaks to people wanting a different flavor experience from milk. Cheese is down as well as cheddar specifically, but I will talk a bit more in a second about that to give you a little more context. And then yogurt is flat, basically, down slightly in terms of retail sales, but strawberry, which is the favorite flavor, is up a little bit in the yogurt category. But giving some context is really important to this because it was 2020 comparison. So if we go to the next slide, this actually shows a comparison between retail cheese sales between 2018, 19, 20, and 21. And so 2021 is that golden line kind of in the middle. 2020 is that green line kind of at the top. And then the red and blue are 2018 and 19. So because comparing to 2020 can cause some challenges, it'll make us look kind of underperforming. But if you look at cheese sales, the golden line of 2021 compared to 2018 and 19, you actually see there's double-digit growth in retail cheese sales. So cheese sales are strong. The problem with year-to-date numbers is we're comparing it to 2020. And 2020 was kind of an outlier in terms of looking at sales data. So our organization and our parent company, the DMI, our national partners, we look at also 2019 comparisons because that gives us a truer sense of growth in the categories. What it shows, though, is that there's great opportunity in the cheese category. And this is where we'll get some more questions around opportunities and innovations. One is giving ingredients, adding ingredients to cheese that people desire or want. In some cases, it can be enhanced protein. In this case, Baby Bell, which is the Laughing Cow company, which not based here, but their innovation was to add probiotics. So again, people looking for an added benefit from their dairy products, and sometimes ingredients can do that. Provenance, being able to lean into the reputation of a state or the notoriety of a state for a particular product. And Sargento has a 4-state cheese, and they call out Vermont sharp cheddar. They also call out Wisconsin. So there's certain states notable for that. So people want to know where their food comes from, and that's a trusted source of where their food is coming from. Elevating the flavor of a meal. Positioning cheese not just as, cheese, a snack or cheese on the side, but really integral to elevating a meal. And that's the one image at the bottom there of a mac and cheese with broccoli that elevates the broccoli in that mac and cheese. And it's worked for my kids. And then snack positioning as well. Positioning cheese, not just as a cheese, as a food, but more positioned as a snack that nourishes, that provides pleasure, that optimizes someone's fueling and protein. And then also sometimes a distraction food. I know we made a lot to say that, but being able to, if something that's like a finger food, just kind of to snack on. And then also sustainable packaging. So this is a big area for dairy across the board, providing packaging that is either recyclable or compostable, or even consumable. So certain packaging that's made from, gelatinous materials or fibers of different sources that can be even consumed, that's an innovation that's moving into the forefront of food packaging overall, but certainly opportunity in the cheese category. Fluid is also an opportunity that can't be ignored, and I'll pass this over to Rainey.
Yeah, thank you, Michael. As we just mentioned, cheese such an important piece of this story, but farmers we know that we work with are very focused on fluid milk innovation. What do consumers want? Where can we meet their needs? So we'll take a quick top line look at that. Fairlife is a name that many people have now heard of and know they have this strong foothold in the market, and they have really driven a lot of the fluid milk innovation across this country. And you can see that top list there, those new products helping to generate 2.4 billion pounds of usage of milk in this country. And these products are things that consumers, again, are looking for and expect from the foods and beverages that they're looking for in the grocery store. And I would just call your attention to that second line there, those categories, the full fat, the recovery, the lactose free, those pieces, those buzzwords are growing amongst the consumer base. So how can we continue to build upon that, and where are there opportunities to enter and elevate those pieces of the pie? Zooming in a little bit, this just gives you an even clearer look at some of the added benefits that these products are providing consumers. And these companies are doing a great job of marketing these products to meet those needs of the consumers. You've got the flavored milks that are growing in popularity. You have the milks that are focused on high protein, whole milks, emerging science and research, really driving the fact that whole fat dairy provides many benefits to consumers out there and are really growing back into the fridge. Energy, lactose free. These are products that offer consumers more than a typical white plain gallon of milk. And that's something you don't see on this slide. These are marketed well, and they're meeting the needs of consumers. When we look to Fairlife, this was a venture that DMI, Michael mentioned, Dairy Management Incorporated, the national checkoff group. They were a big proponent of getting that business, that organization up and running with Coca-Cola. That has now taken off. That acted as a catalytic driver in this category. When Fairlife, that company, saw the success that they have grown, it forces others in the marketplace to get on board. What can we do to offer, again, and meet those demands and needs of consumers? So you're seeing growth of the high proteins, growth of the flavored whole milks, usage in coffee drinks, canned milks. And you can see, again, the buzzwords here on these products: energy, protein, kid builder. These are all things that consumers, families expect from their products. This gives you a sense of the growth that these products can provide the marketplace. Again, value added, the 5.3 annual growth, the flavored milks being a driver in the category, the whole milk products. The thing we do want to call your attention to, though, is the fact that this while these are benefits and gains for the industry, they don't necessarily make up the difference that we're losing from the white, low-fat milks. So again, how do we take that piece and sort of flip the script, and how do we have that milk enter some of these categories? Where can we identify more opportunities for innovation and growth? We also want to discuss quickly plant-based alternatives. While they are a piece of the puzzle and have seen growing, growing purchasing by consumers, they're not necessarily an adversary of milk. It's the bottled waters, it's the coffee drinks, it's the carbonated soft drinks. And you can see some of the reasons why, because those have, for a long time, provided those added benefits to the consumer. Hydration, replenishment, they're healthy, they help wake you up, they provide that energy. When you're thirsty, you turn to them, they offer the sweetness that you're looking for. Those are things, in essence, dairy, we've been playing catch up for quite a while now. We make our products tailored to fit some of these categories and again, these needs from the consumer. So while plant-based is a growing piece of the pie, there are other adversaries and other pieces we need to be aware of. And we just quickly want to touch upon the importance of exports. Exports are a huge piece for the success of this industry. They're an important component of sales, especially given the gap between production and domestic consumption. So again, we produce more milk than we consume as a country. Where is the rest of that going to go? There are huge opportunities overseas and growing markets overseas. The U.S. Dairy Export Council, which is a subsidiary of DMI, leads those efforts to deepen existing markets and explore new markets for dairy exports, such as cheese, whey protein concentrate, sweet whey powder, lactose, and more. So the growth of this chart, the growth of exports is really a win for farmers across the region and across Vermont. And really, since 2000, export sales have grown by more than 400%, and 75% of the new milk produced in the U.S. each year is exported. So we've been able to absorb 25% of that new milk produced each year. Again, if we don't have this avenue, there's even more milk that's saturating this market in the U.S., further driving prices down for farmers on the farm.
So we'll take a chance just to kind of delve a little bit into consumer wants and needs. And this is based on research from our national partners, but also research we've conducted here in New England, including Vermont. We also looked at Vermont specific data as well in what we'll present here. And rather than give you lots of bar charts, I boiled it down, so I'll spare you the eye charts. So millennial moms, these are the moms who are in their early 30s to early 40s. Right now, it's kind of the key area there. And what we know, first of all, is they're very concerned about the health and welfare of themselves and their families. So they want products that provide added benefits. So things that speak to immunity, speak to energy, speak to sort of calm and relaxation, kind of unwinding, digestive health, a big topic for what moms want. So when we begin to look at the constituents in milk, better understand the health properties of different components in milk, nutrients or compounds, that gives opportunities for us then to lean into these other areas. And some of that research and investigation is happening. They want brands that are committed to the environment and to good animal care. So when we look at our research, we have a middle bar. We ask, how much do you agree with the following statements? And we ask if we say something like, dairy farmers take good care of their cows and cow health. And we ask them how much they agree with that. Well, the alarming part for us isn't the positives or negatives. The alarming part is the middle, which always shows up as a gray bar in our charts. And we have about 40% plus or minus that aren't sure. So if you have 40% of consumers who aren't sure if farmers are taking care of their cows, or we're not sure whether or not they're pumping antibiotics into the cows, or not sure what's going on with hormones, then that is an area of alarm. And so where those gaps exist is where we need to be reassuring consumers. And so it's really looking at the areas of wellness. And for them, the quality of the product is that. Also, the purchasing experience needs to be something that educates, engages them more, and inspires them to use dairy products. So as Rainey said, when you look at the new things that have really done well, new product innovations, they're not white with just a label that says whole milk. They've got imagery, they have words, they have colors, and they're not in gallon size. They're in smaller sizes because consumers, again, will gravitate to those. Sometimes grab and go, sometimes just smaller quantity versus a gallon. So it's looking at the purchasing experience and the innovation of the product. And they want trusted information from trusted people. So dairy farmers, in terms of farming practices, for sure are those folks. Health professionals are also important, but also people who are influencers who don't have any degree whatsoever, but are popular in social media are also people they trust. So how do we continue to align as an industry with those trusted voices too? Next slide. So Gen Z is not far behind. So Gen Z are youngsters, children, between 10 and 24 years old. And so this is the generation that's kind of the next generation coming up quickly. They have purchasing power, they have purchasing influence, and they're very activist minded and the most diverse generation in the history of our country are Gen Z. They want to believe in the product and the brands. They want to believe in the people who made the farm, the food for them from the farm. They want to believe that they can trust them. The environment, I mean, you've seen it yourself, how much they're passionate, they're activist minded on environment and cow care. So we have to be there in terms of how we're thinking about dairy as a product, not only in the marketing, but also in the positioning and the messaging. Otherwise, these consumers won't even give us the chance to have more of a conversation with them. They won't try the product if they think it's unhealthy for them or not produced ethically. And they're concerned about added hormones in milk. They don't understand that a mammal that lactates naturally produces hormones. So there's a lot of confusion around what happens on the farm. Next slide, please. And this trust, continues to erode sales. So when there's lack of trust, that certainly affects sales. And these are some of the areas where, talking about benefits that consumers are looking for, these are the kinds of things, but environment is always on the mind. And so if we aren't able to tell that story, if we're not able to engage even on the packaging at the point of sale to be able to talk about sustainability practices or talk about these other attributes of dairy, then it puts us at a disadvantage at that point. Looking at things like conventional versus organic versus regenerative, and it was one of the questions, for consumers aren't sure what all those things mean. They have misperceptions of what organic means. They have misperceptions of regenerative. There's probably a dozen definitions you can find easily just by Googling on what that all means. At the crux of it, it is how are dairy farmers caring for the land, caring for the water, being part of the climate change solution. Those are the things they want to know about. And that's what matters. I think the terms can trip us up versus really focusing on the story we can tell. And that's going to drive product sales at the end of the day. And I think there's a great opportunity looking at product innovation that is really on the forefront of where we can go as an industry moving forward, from packaging to all sorts of opportunities ahead of us in terms of product design.
Yeah, before we leave you with a couple final thoughts, I just wanted to reiterate something Michael mentioned at the top. We, New England Dairy, have been around in this region for a century now, working with farmers, connecting those farmers to our audiences. I am one of 2 staff members here in Vermont. We are ingrained in this community. I'm from the Northeast Kingdom, grew up in Glover, around dairy farms. We just have a very vested interest in making sure that this industry is successful in Vermont, New England, and beyond. So we leave you with a couple takeaways. When we digest this information today, when we look back at our consumer research, we really feel like these are 3 bullet points that this task force could continue to look at in the weeks and years and months to come. We need to deliver what consumers want through a multi-pronged pathway approach. How do we move from this mindset of commodity to a mindset of value added? Again, the high protein, the low lactose, et cetera. How do we meet those consumer demands? We, New England Dairy, can support with research, science. We aren't in the business of creating those products, but how do we work with others that we'll hear from today, that this committee and this task force has spoken to during other meetings? How do we utilize other industry partners to find ways and places to ignite that catalytic impact that can lead to true gains for Vermont dairy? So we need to meet the demands of consumers, or we potentially lose their belief and ultimately their dollars. Consumers want and expect more. They crave more from products that provide, they want products that provide the physical, mental, and emotional benefit for themselves and their families. Cheese, we mentioned, it's a great story. What are those other value-added products, unique flavor opportunities? We've got amazing producers here in Vermont, but what what other value adds might be out there here in this state. And again, added benefits, sustainable packaging, UHT, shelf-stable products. How can Vermont look for and ignite those potential catalytic ideas to get the ball rolling here for the industry in Vermont? Thank you.
We're happy to take any questions from the task force.
We'll put the screen back up and.
Yes, I can.
I just want to add one thing to the committee, the task force discussion. We did have two additional witnesses, one from the Cheese Council, who is in the middle of a grant writing process and had to drop out at the last minute. We also asked Booth Brothers to come and they dropped out last night. So we end up with a little bit with both a lack of their testimony, but also more time to spend with you folks. So if you're good for that, I hope and would encourage the task force to probe a little farther than you might otherwise, because we really have a half an hour before our next witness. So with that, if there are questions from the screen, I guess we'll start with the Zoom members of the task force. Bobby, you have your finger up.
Yeah, thank you. Thanks for the great presentation, guys. It sounded really good. A question that I have is that, maybe as long ago as 15 years, we started encouraging farmers to switch to value-added products and to utilize more of their milk in value-added products, which if you look at the records of today compared to, 15, 20 years ago, instead of transporting 2/3 or 3/4 of our milk in bulk to Boston and Hartford and Providence, we're keeping 2/3 of our milk here in Vermont to put into value-added products, but yet we're still losing farm after farm after farm. And the money that we should be making off these value-added products doesn't seem to be trickling down to the farmer. Have you folks ever looked into where follow the money sort of deal on going with value-added products?
Thank you, Senator, for the question. I'm not familiar with the situation 15 years ago. And I think there are some potentially steps in between the end point of the product that is the consumer is consuming as a high-end product and what ultimately are value-added and what ultimately ends up on the farm. Some of that I'm not completely familiar with, or probably couldn't comment on some of that process, given the implications might be more cost related, or how you pay farmers at the end of the day. I think what we see some of the case studies, things like Fairlife, which I understand is sometimes some farmers don't want to hear the story about Fairlife, to be honest with you. But, and so I understand it. I'll have an annual meeting coming up. I'm sure it may come up during a reception of some sort. But Fairlife did show that there was a benefit back to the farmers who were part of that particular cooperative of farms that agreed to go in and work on that particular product. So I do think there are models that can be looked at in those sort of value-add product areas that could ultimately provide some sort of direct farmer benefit. But again, I think some of that might be beyond my scope. But the example of Fairlife and Terrain's slide of the catalytic impact afterwards, I think that shows where we begin to have other brands and other co-ops say, you know what, we need to also do that same thing. We need to do a high protein, ultra filtered, lower lactose-free product because that's selling. I mean, that has shown that we're moving milk off the market. And I think at the end of the day, at a macro level, economic view, and economics is my strong suit, but if we are removing more milk out of the milk supply, into consumers' stomachs, it's the rising tide. And I think on our level as dairy checkoff, we can work on the rising tide component. Let's get more milk sold. Let's sell more. And hopefully that's going to, through the mechanisms, come down to helping the farmers at the end of the day.
Thank you.
Any other questions from the screen? I don't see any virtual hands.
John Roberts got his hand. And John.
John. We don't see any hands on the screen here. Am I missing something, Linda?
John Roberts and John O'Brien.
Yeah.
It won't show on there, I guess.
Okay, I apologize. John Roberts.
Thank you. Rainey, Michael, really good to see you. Really great presentation. Just quickly, in the edible aisle slide, were pretend milks in one of those aisles?
What was the question? I'm sorry, I didn't answer.
That was my question too.
John, can you repeat the question?
Yeah, in the edible aisle slide, were the pretend milks part of that, and in which aisle were they in?
Almond juice is what he's asking about.
I think it was a blend, John. It was a blend of almond milk and dairy. And I see this happening in a lot of industries where they're blending plant-based, plant-based foods with meat as an example. And it's like, seems to be playing on people's, in some ways, I feel like in some ways they're not educated enough to see that. I don't want to say that they're being maybe fooled or whatever, but it's like meeting halfway. Oh, I want milk, but I also want to, not drink as much milk. So I'll mix it in with almond for the benefits of both or something like that. But I do see that being a trend. Purdue is doing the same with like chicken nuggets. And I've heard this a lot from animal welfare organizations that are basically trying to sort of offset in some ways, like the negatives around animal production by adding in plant-based, part of it being plant-based, I guess, trying to play on people's fears or misinformation. I don't know. Anyway, sorry to interrupt, but.
No, I appreciate that, Heather, and I understand that. I just was curious as to whether the plant-based milks were included in the edible aisle. And that was
That's right.
it's okay.
Yeah.
The next question I had was, I'm assuming that farm-made product like Jasper Hill or Shelburne Farms or whomever, I assume their cheese sales are also included in these overall cheese sale pictures. Is that right? Okay.
Confirm that because it's positioned as retail sales. I'd have to see if that actually captures their number. I'd have to confirm that for you. As for the other question about the dairy bar containing the line containing the alternatives, that's because now the retail sales are reported in that particular system. So I understand your sensitivity to that, but yeah,
But I think Heather touched upon something important though. We know, I forget the number, but there's a huge percentage of households who feel for whatever reason it's more healthy to drink a plant-based alternative. Most of those households are also still buying real dairy products because cooking with real dairy, the flavors just taste better. Those are true dishes. You just don't get the same impacts and same effects using plant-based for other things other than maybe drinking a glass, using it in a smoothie, things like that. So many of those households who still buy plant-based there's also a half gallon of some sort of real dairy product in the fridge as well.
Okay. My final question is, I mean, this is all, you know, very exciting information. And I sort of sit here and think, oh my God, why aren't dairy farmers millionaires now? Because of this. So I'm sort of, this question is sort of, what are the barriers that you guys see to taking this research information and getting processors and retailers to actually use it? And I certainly think it's better than it used to be when I started dairy farming 40 plus years ago. But do you still see barriers, and what do you think they are to using this consumer information to increase sales?
That's a really good question. I think one of the barriers you're going to find is, brands are smart, brands are very savvy. So they know what sells in terms of their consumer. I think one of the big drivers is when you start to look at some of the innovations, you have to put in a new line for like manufacturing. So sometimes the manufacturing barrier can be there. Having to set up a whole new system to be able to run a UHT line, or something that's going to be shelf stable, for example. I mean, schools want shelf stable because it allows cut down on storage space and refrigeration. So that's an avenue that is being researched, but you have to also set up a whole new system to do that. Burn Dairy, did that recently, but it was very expensive. So the question is, I think one of those how to take the idea, move it into manufacturing. There's a lot of cost involved, processes involved, and then you have to start weighing. We have to start weighing. So is my sales and offset the investment I'm putting in up front, into a new product. So that's just generally, what companies and brands are going to do. They're going to weigh the pros and cons of doing that. So I'm sure, like for example, in the case of OBrien's, they weighed the pros and cons of adding a probiotic, which is not difficult to do to achieve product. And they're a pretty smart company, so they figured it out. But that's the kind of thing that needs to happen, is that kind of conversation internally on their side. Like, we don't drive that conversation, but we can bring partners together. We can bring partners from DNI who have worked at big brands, like one gentleman worked for Kraft. He's very smart about these new product things, but they're the kind of consultation we can provide, if there's a company that wants to pursue it.
Okay, and I actually have one more question. It's always been and this may veer into policy, so you may feel you can't answer this, but policy, kids in school get fat-reduced milk. They don't get full whole milk. They don't get chocolate milk, both of which are shown to be higher taste, better quality taste, if delivered cold and in proper containers instead of the cardboard thing. So sort of again is, does any of your information sort of indicate that school children are being turned off from dairy products because they're not getting, in my opinion, the best dairy products presented to them? Do you have any comment you feel safe giving me on that?
Start. I mean, I think we would agree with you, John, and I think we hear the same from school nutrition directors, from others in that supply chain. Students, kids want a better flavored product. They feel that the flavor is saturated by the cardboard cartons, more access, different flavors. I mean, kids want all of the same things we just told you about, but yeah, I mean, there's certainly those barriers to allowing those types of products in the school setting. So, and I think Ray's spot on. And obviously, cold isn't it? An issue. Making sure milk stays cold. The service line. We have research with youth that say, we had one student who replied to it in a focus group that he took a swig of his milk and it was chunky.
And that was the last time he drank school milk. So, I mean, that's the kind of thing we're trying, our team works really hard in schools to try to educate about keeping right temperature and so on and so forth. But we have provided information, because that's what we can do, in the past where maybe something was afoot to restrict flavored milk. Our team has provided scientific evidence for consideration by committees. That's something we can do. We can provide science to explain the chocolate milk does not make kids fat. Chocolate milk is nutritious, has the same nutrients as white milk, and kids consume it. So I can give a student a carton of white and they'll never drink it. I give them a carton of chocolate, they'll drink it. I just won. I'm a dietitian. I want to drink milk, whether it's chocolate or I don't care what flavor you make it. So I think that's one of the things. And the research is building. At the end of the day, and you may have heard this before, John, getting that science to feed up to the Dietary Guidelines Advisory Committee and into the dietary guidelines, which we provide science as National Dairy Council to that committee, but that's the way to ultimately have whole milk back into schools is when the guidelines change. So we keep the science pumping out as a dairy industry, provide that to the committee, and then it's up to them as scientists to weigh, is the preponderance of the evidence sway enough to be able to change recommendations in that direction. So that's how the process works, and we just keep pumping out the science to understand the benefit of whole milk to children.
Thank you both very much.
Absolutely. Thanks, John, for the question.
Hey, Bobby, I can't see the hands up on the screen.
John O'Brien is up, I believe.
Okay, do you want to just call on people and that'll make it go easier? Okay, is that all right? Okay.
John?
Thank you, Bobby. Thanks, guys, for coming in. I had a question, interesting. That slide on exports was really interesting, I thought, and I'd love to have you go more into that. Especially because I was thinking the reverse also, in that one of Vermont dairy farmer came on earlier and said Kerry Gold was the #1 selling butter in the US from Ireland. And recently I just bought Cathedral Cheddar, which I'd never heard of, which originally was an English cheddar, but is owned by a Canadian company now. And so there's certainly a good deal of penetration in cheese, for example, that's imported. So how, if there were no imports, say, of dairy, where would we stand as far as that production versus domestic consumption?
Yeah, that's a great question, Representative O'Brien. I think clearly, if we had no exports of dairy, it would be a very difficult situation. If 75% of the new milk produced each year is moved out in exports, we would be in a very challenging picture to not have any exports. One of the areas in exports that's growing in interest, believe it or not, because we work with a lot of international food service partners. So the same places you have in the United States, obviously they have a global footprint. So places like pizza, for example, is a key driver in export of cheese across the world. And there's some target markets where there's opportunities for continued growth. So that's a way. So exports, to your point, is a key component. I don't know the balance of the imports versus the exports. We have as Rainey mentioned, the U.S. Dairy Export Council. That's what they do all day, every day. And Krista Harden, who's the CEO, formerly Secretary Vilsack, was the CEO of U.S. Dairy Export Council. So Krista just recently took over. They've got all the details on where the opportunities are. But as it relates to pizza, places like the Middle East and Northern Africa, Asia, places like Japan and China, Latin America are real growth. Eastern Europe are real growth areas for pizza. So the opportunity to move, millions of pounds of more cheese just in that area alone is pretty huge. But then lactose, for animal feed is also a growing market. So the whole swine issue that happened in China, they couldn't get lactose to feed the pigs. So that was a big issue during the pandemic, because we're like a major exporter of lactose on the marketplace. So there's a lot of those opportunities. So exports, I think, is just more opportunity ahead for us as an organization. I can certainly give you more information if you want more about the trade gap or the trade balance between imports and exports. I certainly can connect with my colleagues at USDEC to do that.
Well, since you know the retail business pretty well, what is it when American consumer tastes want an imported dairy product? Is it flavor? Is it just marketing? What is it? Because we certainly have great dairy here across the board.
Yeah, absolutely.
Yeah, that's a great question.
Yeah, we definitely agree. I think it's a little bit of that, right? It's just a little bit of the taste might be a little different. I've never tried Kerrygold, so I couldn't tell you. The taste may be a little bit different. The marketing certainly made the mystique of its Irish butter and the commercials. So with an Irish brogue, I mean, that certainly helps with the positioning of it as an interesting product. And I think sometimes people hear it, they try it, and maybe after time they're like, well, you know, it isn't that much different. So I would love to see like repeat purchase data on Kerrygold. Like, do they actually convince someone this is worth the premium to purchase something from Ireland? And sometimes it's, you know, there's a fair slice of Americans that have a little bit of food snobbery. Like, I will only have cheese from, you know, the Parma Reggiano from Italy, from Parma, Italy. I will only eat this cheese, you know, feta from Greece. So, you know, sometimes you have some of that part of our culture where people, you know, enjoy food from a particular region. But it's a little bit of everything, I think, mixed into there. So why they go into it.
I think again, you mentioned commercial, Michael, marketing. I think some of these companies and these brands do just a great job of storytelling again, which is where US industry, I think in certain aspects is playing catch up on that front.
Agreed.
Another question I had was just, you showed those 5 buckets, which sort of match the classifications. And then you mentioned it, you brought it up briefly on I guess whey going to China and Vietnam, places like that. How big is the sort of like both the powders that you might end up with in whether it's Annie's mac and cheese or even things like dog food, and then also, you know, the sort of non-human consumed dairy products that we either use here or we export? Is that a really big bucket?
I would have to consult a resource to know that. I don't know that fact off the top of my head about the relative size of those areas. So it would be unfair for me to answer that because I would be speculating.
Okay. My last question is just something I thought of over the weekend was just since we've been at this now on the task force for a while, and you guys, you know, the landscape, what do we really do well in New England with our dairy farms, you know, in comparison to or the rest of the United States or even overseas dairy farms? I mean, we know like scale wise, we always hear of bigger farms elsewhere, but is there something, because you're connected to that retail side of things, is there something we do really well in New England that's not done as well in other places?
That's an interesting question.
I thought we did everything better than most other regions.
There's the answer. I think in New England and in Vermont, I think there's more of a bucolic sense around dairy farms. Sort of that quote unquote, I'll say quintessential, you know, image of a dairy farm tends to be something that, you know, people will bring up when they think about dairy farming in Vermont or dairy farming in New England. So I think that's something, it's more image oriented. I do think you have a very strong story to tell about the innovations being done, you know, here in Vermont, particularly around your sustainability practices, around the improvements and things like cover cropping. I'm not saying you're better than another region. I don't honestly know the statistic, but I do know that Vermont is leading the pack in cover crop in some of those innovations. And I think when people understand that, when the consumer understands that, it means something. It seriously does mean something. So to Raymond's point, they're telling those stories more, being able to work with farmers to tell their story about what they're doing on their farm. They don't have to do it all. They could be doing one particular thing that's notable, but let us tell that story, because that builds the trust and demand in the dairy products in the long run. So I do think you have a very strong story about the commitments, the hard work dairy farmers are doing around sustainability and around, just the lifestyle. I'm talking with our chair of our board over lunch, and she was just talking about it's a life she would never give up because it's just something she loves to do. And so, that heart for the farm, which I'm not saying is Vermont unique compared to Midwest, but I think that is something that people, if they hear it coming from a dairy farmer, it's very impactful to hear the heart of a farmer, why they love to do what they do, even when they're facing debt, but the fact that they love it and they don't want to stop. I think that goes a long way to have that kind of heart in the story. And we need to bring more of that out.
Is that Heidi?
Yes, yeah.
Very true.
I'm just rehashing some of what you said, Michael, but I agree. I think, I'm sure this is the case in the Midwest, on the West Coast as well, but I think here in New England, our farms are so intrinsically tied to our landscape that we need to continue to elevate those stories while also making sure the consumer understands that this is no longer the three-legged stool. I'm milking each cow by hand, one at a time down the stalls. Dairy farming is modern. Let's make sure the consumer understands that while also embracing this sense of place. Let's, as an industry and as a state, rally around the amazing work being done by Heather and the team at UVM to look at ways to continue to elevate and increase our sustainability work. Michael said, not every practice fits every farm, but what is each farm doing to help protect our landscape, to care for their cows, to make a great product? How do we just better tell those stories? And that's what we as local dairy checkoff are trying to do.
Tells that story.
Yeah.
Who tells that story? Do we rely on the manufacturers of individual products to do it? Does the state doesn't really do it? We know we've seen examples of other states such as California that have done it. Do we know whether or not investments in marketing like that work?
They can absolutely work, depending on how it's designed and how you go about it. It's funny you just mentioned answer that question, because I was about to use an example of a dairy product that I purchased. It's an organic product, but the story of their farmer is right on the side panel of the carton. And
The cardboard waxed carton.
it is, yeah.
No. No. That is not sustainable packaging.
You're correct. It is not recyclable. However, it was compelled to read the story. Every time I took the thing out of the fridge, I read the same thing over again. It wasn't the news story. But I think that there is opportunity, and obviously that's a cost-driven decision by that brand that's authentic to them. So I think there's opportunity for more of us to pull together in telling that story. Promotion, that's what we do every day. When we check clock in, that's what we're up to, that's what we're doing, is telling that story through getting into more of the digital media space, because our consumers they're not watching TV as we used to do, as we used to watch TV. They're doing it on demand. So they're pulling up live streaming something when they want it. So how do we get into that space? How do we get in front of them at the different moments? That's what we work on. But again, we also, with the agency, we've collaborated with the agency on projects together as well here in Vermont.
Yep. Working with the 3 watershed groups like John's. We have a Vermont Ag Communicators group, including the 3 watersheds. Jackie's a part of that call, just to try to keep all of us here in Vermont on the same page, telling the same story at the same time of the year. Who's
who's telling that story in what channels and what places, what audiences are we talking to? So I really do think it's a multi-pronged approach, and we just all need to be coordinated in the message and in the place and in the time, but let's all tell the same story together. So can we collaborate as an industry, to your point, Rainey, with brands, with processors to say, April is Earth Day. Can we pull together as an industry around that time, and let's do something together so that we can talk about the sustainability practices, or the beginning of the year is a time with folks that focus around health. Is there something can we start pulling in the same direction more collaboratively? I think that will have a multiplier of impact on the trust parameters. But when I said earlier, like having a more engaging shopping experience, it's like not just the white container, right? It's good. There's opportunities, real estate for education on that. QR codes, where you can, click on a QR code on the side of a container of milk, and a farmer video pops up, and the farmer's thanking you for purchasing their product and showing them their farm. I mean, there's opportunities to use technology to engage people in that story. So,
And I also just want to put in a plug. I'm an owner, I'm a farmer, was the Cabot logo for a long, long time, and they're still using that. If you see our trucks going by, they feature farms. They feature the farmers right there. And if you go to the Waterbury store, those farms are featured on huge pictures there. So we have been doing that also, and that's a very effective way. David Ainsworth, you might remember, was one of the Santa Claus Cabot people who used to go down to New York City. So yeah, I just have one quick question.
Bobby, if I could just interrupt for 1 second.
I think, yeah.
Bobby, just 1 second. Linda's informed us that the audience watching YouTube is having trouble with the audio. And Linda has asked me to pass along that the meeting is being recorded separately and will be posted after the meeting. So we apologize for the problem. YouTube's not able to upgrade at this point, but there will be a separate copy. I don't know how the people who can't hear will know what I've just announced, but in any case, that's the
It's on the
announcement.
bottom of the screen.
It's crackling.
They'll know.
So hopefully you heard through the crackling. Also, time-wise, Adeline is with us. I'm reminded of beware of what you asked for. I asked for in-depth questioning, but now we've run through the time. But with that, I yield back to you, Mr. Starr.
Well, Heather's had her hand up for a while, and we should take her question, and then we'll move on to Adeline. Heather?
It's not fair.
Yeah, Jackie has a question as well, Heather, so, and if you could just keep Jackie in mind a little bit.
Thank you.
And I will, I won't ask any questions, so. Heather.
I think this will be quick. I'm not sure if you directly answered this question, but we're talking about storytelling for farms, and are consumers willing or interested in paying for environment? I sort of hear this a lot, that's what consumers are really interested in, especially maybe millennials and these sort of next generations, I guess. But is that really playing out in the marketplace? Does that matter? Would that matter for dairy? And that's where I see where Vermont dairy has set itself apart, which you mentioned. But we haven't capitalized on that at all, from what I can tell. And we've talked about it a lot amongst, in various interviews and such and people we've heard from. But I'm wondering if there's really a market for that story and that milk.
Yes, is the short answer. There is a market for that story, and for milk that people can trust. So there was a brand I saw recently that was doing, I'm not recalling the name, that was really pushing hard on the fact that they were sustainably produced milk, And I'm sure it was premiumly priced because they could do that as, calling that particular benefit out. So I think there is opportunity for how to, position that benefit or that attribute. I do want to say too, I know that milk is commingled in our region. So I don't want to be insensitive to the fact of the realities of what happens when milk goes into a processing plant. It's very difficult to say, well, unless you have your own brand, off your farm, to say like, this is Vermont milk only kind of a deal. That being said, the farms throughout our region also do a lot of great work in sustainability. I happen to mention Vermont because there's specific things I know that have happened here. But I think that, looking at that story as a whole, there's opportunity. And I think people will pay incremental, just based on what we've seen in other products, to get that benefit, to be able to say it's sustainably produced. And that's why I think people have gone to some of these home delivery grocery, like large box, preventing waste of produce. They pay a little more for that produce, but they do it because they're doing something for the environment. So I do think there is opportunity there.
Thank you.
No other hands up, Dan.
Yeah, Jackie has a question in the room, but
I'm waving, Senator.
Oh, well, go
Thank you.
for
Thank you. So glad you guys are here. Been advocating to have you here for a long time, and I appreciate what you presented. Couple quick things. It's very hard to do consistent marketing when, as I mentioned earlier, you've got sustainable packaging you want to promote and we're doing wax. What is up with that? The other issue I have is you mentioned how hard it is when people get mixed messages, and we have marketing going on in the state that says we have no antibiotics in the milk. And there's a little tiny disclaimer down at the bottom it is just divisive to the industry. And it's because there are no antibiotics in milk, but people, the millennials don't, when they see that, they think, oh, okay, so I've got to buy that milk because everything else has antibiotics. I had the opportunity, I think Jenny Carl sent me a link to watch I think you guys were part of the presentation with the millennials and the Gen Z. That was excellent. And it scared the bejesus out of me to see what those Gen Z people don't know about milk. And we've got to be able to modernize that to make them understand that dairy farms are modern, that we use all the little gadgets and bells and whistles that they can't give up. That's a huge story. And the last thing I want to say is, I'm not sure if everybody knows, I got a notice yesterday that Senator Gillibrand is having a hearing today. I thought it was the Dairy Coalition. I'm not sure if you guys are involved in that. It actually started at 10 o'clock and Senator Leahy is on that committee. It's like the Dairy Nutrition Subcommittee or something. They're having a presentation by Tufts University, and apparently it is very heavy on milk is bad, very heavy on almond juice is wonderful. The info I got, and I'll be glad to send it to you guys and to the committee, they're wanting us to send letters to the members, particularly Senator Leahy, because whoever sent it out had some very good bullets regarding what was wrong with this presentation. And the problem was, I think that the Tufts Research Group was given money by, I believe it was USDA to do this. Might be wrong on that, but I will send you all the link. And if we could all, I know you're not allowed to do policy, but you can certainly educate. And if there's an opportunity that you can send this to, there were 7 senators on this list, but Senator Leahy was on it. And I know that if he gets information from us, he would truly appreciate it and hopefully try to offset some of this misinformation. So I'll make sure that you guys get it and I'll send it to Linda. Thank you very much.
Thank you for sharing that. It disappoints me because I graduated from Tufts University.
Oh, ask for your money back.
Parents do that.
Thank you very much.
Thank you.
Appreciate it.
okay. Adeline, I have to ask if your indulgence one more time, if possible. Linda just passed a note that if we take our break now, YouTube may be able to fix the audio. Are you flexible to allow us to take a break to allow that to happen?
I am. Thank you for asking.
Thank you. Thank you. So if we'll take our break now, and come back at 10:15.